Well, Goldeneye finally released this week after months and months of waiting when it was announced in Nintendo's Direct last year, and I got a chance to check both games out. I was initially going to do like my immediate impressions of each one and just kind of play it live, but there was a lot of stuff that went into just getting one of them set up, and it's unfortunate, I will say, because it is that situation of you go through them and each one has their drawbacks, and you just kind of sit back, look at that remake, and wonder, how did Nintendo and Microsoft let this happen? So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure you like it and subscribe down below. So I do want to start by saying I think it's good that we have Goldeneye on modern platforms of some kind. And I'll admit, when you open up the 64 app and you see Goldeneye at the top, nice big box art there, it is impressive stuff. It is really fun to see that they were able to at least get it out the door in some capacity, even though I'm kind of looking at it as a very minimal effort. And let's start with the Switch version. Okay, so I open up the application, box art's there, great. I go into the game, and then I immediately realize that the control scheme is not great, at least by default. People are going through and figuring out different ways to remap the buttons, and I think they've mostly figured it out by doing the solitaire controller configuration, and that will move the look and the movement options around, and then you have to switch the right and left stick in the Switch system level button configuration, and then you have to remap ZL to ZR. Yeah, there's a lot of extra steps that go into this, and I think it would have been a lot better if Nintendo decided to just take care of all of that from the get-go within the application and the game itself, because you basically have to either leave a controller set up for GoldenEye specifically or save a profile that you'll switch to when it's time to play GoldenEye. If you don't do this, it's not great. Like the left stick is basically move and look around essentially, because the auto aim is so over the top as it was on the Nintendo 64 that your cursor will move from one side of the screen to the other to lock on to different enemies. Then the right stick is like a strafe, and it's very, very peculiar, right? So the best option, and what I ended up doing, was just getting my Nintendo 64 controller for NSO, and I understand they're harder to get, they're always sold out, and they're double the price on eBay, so maybe Nintendo's thinking, it's just, why would we remap this when we can try to sell people on a product that we also never have in stock? But who knows, maybe down the road they can work to patch this in some way, which they have done with different games on the Nintendo 64 online and even Super Nintendo and regular Nintendo. So that's my biggest thing now, is just giving Nintendo feedback of, hey, most people aren't going to look up a guide on how to button map and configure their controller for just a single game. They're just going to look at that and say, what is wrong with this? And then sort of move on from there, which is going to give a bad first impression for GoldenEye. And I'll tell you this, GoldenEye, especially for the younger generation, they're just going to be confused looking at it. It's a nostalgia trip for a lot of us older people who remember this game when it first came out, specifically spending time with a lot of your friends, huddled around a tube TV, just literally running around in these different small areas, attempting to shoot each other with some crazy auto aim. I do like how in the options you can pick widescreen, and it completely gets rid of the borders and fills up your entire screen with the 16:9 aspect ratio. I thought it was illegal to get rid of those borders, but here we are. Hey, you know what, Nintendo? Just a wild thought. Maybe come up with a system level option that allows us to remove the borders in the first place with all the games. Now, the game itself, I think, looks fine on the Switch. It's a 64 title. It has a lot of limitations when it comes to the visual aspect, so just upscaling that thing even to 720p and having it at a steady 30 is significantly better than what we were dealing with on the Nintendo 64. I'm not really sure where we are with frame rate and resolution for these different versions, as I'm playing, it just looks better than what I was dealing with for the 64 there for years and years now. But I was having a good time playing through it, and then I did go online with the game. I set up a match with a couple of people from the Spawncast. We initially had 3 people, then 4 people, And once again, the control scheme certainly reared its ugly head, as I feel like most of us were playing the game just differently based on the controls we had available to us or what we had set up in the options. So it wasn't pretty. It was a lot of spray and pray and hope that the auto aim just happens to catch someone, but it certainly led to some good times on there. Unfortunately, still no real voice chat natively to the Switch, whether you have to open up your application on your phone or fire up Discord. And to be honest, half the fun of Goldeneye was smack talking somebody who was 5 feet from you. It is pretty funny, though, that we're now in 2023 and we're still talking about screen looking, even though we're playing online, because when you do that, it still splits your screen into 4 squares. So you still have the tiny little square to deal with on your TV. So it's sort of funny because that means that the younger generation will indeed get to experience what we all did back then, which is looking at your friend's screen and pretending like, oh, I didn't know you were around that corner. I just happened to show up firing before I even walked in the room. Now, looking at the Xbox version, a significantly better experience when it comes to the control. See, even on the Switch, if you do remap and change things up, as people are mentioning online, you're still limited to 4 directions for your movement because you're either using the D-pad or the C buttons, whereas on the Xbox, it's a much more fluid dual analog stick control that is much more modern, and you can certainly tell as you are playing through the game. Now, you only really have campaign on the Xbox and local multiplayer. Unfortunately, online multiplayer is specific to the Switch version that has the worst control scheme. So you can kind of see what the issue is. In fact, we have basically 2 different versions of the game that if you could just merge them together, would create a significantly better experience across the board, whether it's giving online play to the Xbox version or giving the control scheme with the dual analog setup to the Switch version. The Xbox version does have the 4K resolution and I guess the higher frame rate, although the frame rate, I did notice it was a little spotty when I was going through the Xbox version, and the visual glitches, which are in the Nintendo 64 version, but they're covered up because it's such a lower resolution, were much more apparent. Different levels you'd be running through, and you'd see kind of lines and stuff popping up on screen. One of my favorite levels in GoldenEye, and it's one that's stuck with me for decades now, is Surface. Either Surface 1 or 2. Surface 1 is during the day, and then Surface 2 is at night. It's basically where they drop Bond into a field of snow, and it's like this little sandbox level, but it had this feeling of isolation because it was fairly quiet. You have the music playing, but it's just kind of you walking around in the field, and occasionally you'll come across an enemy, and you have a sniper, so you can pick them off from range, but it was this very desolate feeling as you're going around, and it just the atmosphere they built on a 64-bit system, it was so good that I still remember it to this day. So I am enjoying going back through all these different levels with the better visuals, really the upscaled look of even the 2D tree backdrop that you have there in crisp 4K. But the frame rate does help quite a bit, especially even in multiplayer on the Switch. So all of the upgrades across the board make the game better on either system. And I don't know if 4K helps necessarily that much more for this setup, but it is still nice to have it, even though it's on a Nintendo 64 game. You also have achievements, which were busted at first, but they appear to have been fixed now. And looking at the achievements, there are some that'll be great for people who are longtime fans of the game, who maybe have that muscle memory or remember certain aspects to run through levels extra fast or unlock different cheat modes. Yes, that's right. Back then, you would unlock cheats by playing the game. you wouldn't need to take your credit card out to buy them. So here's the part that I'm most disappointed in across the board with Microsoft and Nintendo, and I guess MGM, as they had a say in this clearly since their logo is right there at the beginning of the game. They got Goldeneye out, which is impressive on its own. I just think it's a shame that they let it happen to where they did seemingly the bare minimum. And we all know that that remake is out there. It's leaked online. It is a genuinely good experience overall. I mean, there's still some parts of it we haven't been able to try, like the online multiplayer and maybe the vision that they had for that aspect of the game. But playing through the single player campaign of it, being able to switch from old visuals to new visuals, having the updated control scheme and a few other bits of quality of life improvements in there would have been the correct route to go. Instead, it feels like we have two different versions that are, I don't want to say piecemealed, but they definitely have their own flaws that unfortunately are fairly hard to overcome. No multiplayer on the Xbox, and you think of GoldenEye and you immediately think of playing with your friends potentially online currently. And then looking at the Switch, just a very rough control scheme out of the gate. And even when you configure it to the best possible settings, still not great. And I'm sure all of the discussions and agreements behind the scene to get this done were pretty ridiculous, since you technically can't even buy the game. It's just subscription locked. So you have it on Game Pass or you have it on Nintendo Switch Online. And in fact, for Rare Replay, it does not get added to the physical version of the game, only the digital version, which I can only assume has to do with adding it in, but then also potentially being able to maybe remove it. Basically, everything has to be under that online check for it to work. And I think my biggest fear now is that all of the parties involved view this release as good enough and they just sort of move along rather than attempt to come back to the table and figure out how to get that remake released officially. Even though that's probably wishful thinking, and the fact that we're here talking about GoldenEye release at all is, again, impressive and even surprising. Really, it comes down to what could have been with that remake. But I guess at this point, it's better than nothing to have GoldenEye released on current platforms with the Xbox and on the Switch. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Are you enjoying the game, whether it's for the first time or revisiting some of those nostalgic retro memories? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.